The warmth of a great ballroom in the depth of winter is a made thing. 100 candles and 2 banked fires, and every silk gown and glass of hot negus go into the building of it, and the people who move through that warmth agree, without ever saying so aloud, to behave as though it had cost them nothing and had always simply been theirs. That was the truth of the winter assembly at Bath, in the coldest January anyone could remember. Outside, the streets were iron. The Avon ran black and slow between its frozen edges, and the chairmen stamped and blew on their fingers in the porticos. Inside the upper rooms, it might have been the softest evening in June. The musicians in the gallery kept the air full of sound. The couples formed and turned and parted and formed again in the long, bright figures of the dance. And the whole room glittered with the particular ease of people who have never once in their lives had to ask whether there would be a place for them. In every such room, there is one square of floor the warmth does not reach. It is never marked. You find it, if you find it at all, by looking for the one person the warmth has agreed to leave out. At the winter assembly at Bath, that person stood very straight against a pillar near the lesser door, apart from the chaperones, and watched the dancing with an expression of pleasant, careful nothing. She was 24. Her gown was 3 seasons old, and had been turned and remade so skillfully that only another woman who had done the same would have known it. Her gloves were clean, her back straight. She held her chin in a way a stranger might take for pride, and that was only the last discipline of a person who has learned that the face is the one thing no one can take from you, and so must be kept in order at any cost. Her name was Ceres Alderton, and the reason she stood alone was the reason she would stand alone all evening, and had at every assembly for 2 years, and would go on standing alone until the world forgot a thing it had no intention of forgetting. She had a dance card at her wrist on its little silk cord, and it was empty, the small pencil beside it not once lifted. Around her, the other cards had filled within the first quarter hour, in a happy scramble of bows and half-promises. Hers stayed as blank as the hour it was handed to her. She was not asked. That was the whole of it. A gentleman would drift toward her, drawn by the straight back and the quiet that sat on her like something rare, and come within a few steps. Then some friend would lean to his ear, or some mother catch his sleeve, and the name would be said, low, and Ceres would watch the small change come over his face, the little cooling, the polite correction, of course, the way a man steers round a chair he had not seen. They did not cut her cruelly. It would almost have been easier if they had. They simply, gently, endlessly, did not come. So she named places instead. It was a habit from childhood, the only eccentricity she let herself be seen in. When the cold of a room got into her, the cold that has nothing to do with the weather, she would fix her eyes on the middle distance and name, silently, the far places her father had loved and neither of them had ever seen. Samarcand, Trebizond, the Cape of Storms. He had kept a great creased map on his study wall, and of an evening he would touch those names with one finger as another man tells a rosary, and say, "You and I shall go there, Ceres, one day, when the work is done." The work was never done. He was dead. But the names still took her, for a moment, out of any room that did not want her, into a wide, bright air where a woman with no dances left could at least, in her own mind, be going somewhere. She was somewhere near the Cape of Storms when the music ended and the last dance before supper was called. It was the dance the whole evening had been leaning toward. The couples who had kept it in reserve for one another came together all down the room in a soft rush. And Ceres Alderton, standing alone by the lesser door, with her empty card and her far places, understood that supper would come next, and that at supper she would sit where the companion of Mrs. Vellicott was meant to sit below everyone and eat very little and be spoken over, and that this was the shape of the evening and the shape of the life, and that there was nothing to be done about any of it but to keep her chin in order and get through. And then, at the far end of the long, bright room, a man who had not danced in 10 years set down his glass. No one saw it but her, and she saw it only because she happened to be looking at nothing in his direction. A tall man, dark, still as a pillar himself, standing where he always stood at the cold edge of things. A man whom every soul in that room could have told you, with perfect certainty, did not dance, had not danced in 10 years, and never would again. He set down his glass on the ledge beside him, and he began to walk. To understand what it meant for that man to cross that floor, you must first understand the name that had emptied her card, and to understand the name, you must go back 2 years, and a little more. Her father had been Mr. Bartram Alderton of Somerset, a solicitor and man of business, and for 30 years the most exact and trusted man in 3 parishes. He had kept the affairs of half the good families of the district, and the whole of the great Ockley legacy besides, a fortune left in trust to found a school and an almshouse for the poor, and in all that time, not 1 shilling had ever gone astray beneath his hand. He was the sort of man to whom others gave their keys and their secrets, and slept the sounder for it. And then a great sum went out of the Ockley Trust, and did not come back, and there was a deed to show where it had gone, and the deed was written in Bartram Alderton's hand, or in a copy of his hand so faithful that 3 men of standing were willing to set their names and their honor to it in open court, and not 1 soul of any weight would stand up to say them wrong. He was ruined inside a week. The families who had trusted him with everything took back their keys and their secrets, and would not meet his eye in the street. The newspapers had his name for a whole raw spring, printed in letters as large as the presses could make them, and every person who mattered read it over their chocolate and shook their heads. He was dead inside 18 months. The physician wrote something long and Latin on the paper at the end, but there is a plain English word for what kills an honest man who has been named a thief before the whole world and cannot prove that he is not one, and everyone in Somerset knew the word and used it quietly among themselves. Ceres had been a girl of 14. She had sat in that courtroom on the hard bench with her gloved hands folded, and she had heard her father say, in a voice gone high and strange, and not his own, that he had never in all his life taken a coin that was not his to take, that some other hand had made that deed, and set his name beneath it to carry the weight of it. She had believed him. She believed him still, 10 years after, on this cold night in Bath, with the same whole and useless certainty. She had been alone in the world since, and these last 2 hard years, thrown at last upon her own hands for her bread, had been the worst of them. It made no difference to anyone. The belief of a daughter proves nothing, and after a while it does not even move people. She was only a name they would rather not have in the room, a draft from a door someone had forgotten to shut, a reminder that the comfortable floor a person stands upon can open without warning, and so they shut their doors on her, house by house and season by season, and went back to their warm rooms, and she learned to say her own name, last of all the words she gave a stranger, because she had watched too many times the way a face changes in the instant it lands. There was, in all the world, exactly 1 door that had not shut on Ceres Alderton. It was not a kind door, and it had not opened out of any kindness, but it stood open, and a woman with nowhere else to stand cannot always be choosing her doorway. That door belonged to Mrs. Vellicott. Mrs. Vellicott was the widow of a Bristol man who had made a great fortune in sugar and shipping, and died before he could spend it on the one thing it could not quite buy, the easy belonging of people who have never had to earn their place. Mrs. Vellicott meant to buy that belonging in his stead, by main force, and had worked out that a companion who was a real gentleman's daughter, with a gentleman's manners and a gentleman's way of coming into a room, was worth a great deal to a woman trying to learn such things for the first time at 50. That the gentleman's daughter came cheap, being ruined, only sweetened the bargain. Mrs. Vellicott had engaged Ceres, much as she might a clever dressmaker, for the improvement of her own appearance in the world, paid her £30 a year and her keep, and reminded her of the great debt of it perhaps twice a day. It was not a warm situation, but it was a situation, and Ceres had learned by then not to ask of a situation that it should also be kind. Mrs. Vellicott brought her to the assemblies because a companion was an ornament and a convenience both, someone to carry the shawl and remember the names and make the fourth at cards. She did not bring her out of any wish that Ceres should dance, or be seen, or be happy. Indeed, on the nights when the Alderton name did its quiet work and the cold began to gather about the two of them, Mrs. Vellicott had a way of drifting off across the room toward warmer company and leaving her companion to stand alone by the lesser door, as though a little distance might keep the draught from catching her as well. So Ceres stood alone. She had grown, in 2 years, very nearly expert at it. She knew how to hold a cup of negus, so her hands had something to do, how to watch the dancing with an air of mild enjoyment, as though she had chosen to sit it out, how to be a pillar among the pillars and give the room no sport. And when even that grew too heavy to hold up, she had her far places, Samarkand and Trebizond and the Cape of Storms, and she went to them and waited for the evening to be over. She had gone to them tonight, a long way off past the edge of the map, when the last dance before supper was called, and the couples rushed together, and the cold closed over her like water over a dropped stone. Supper, she thought, with the flat calm of a person who has stopped expecting anything better, and the low seat, and home to Mrs. Vellicott's cold house, and the same again next week, until she was too old even to serve as an ornament. And after that, she did not let herself think. And that was the moment, precisely that moment, when the tall, dark man at the far end of the room set down his glass and began to walk. She did not know him. She knew of him, as everyone did. Everyone in Bath knew the Duke of Merivale by sight, and everyone had a different tale of why he was the way he was, and no two of the tales agreed upon anything save the single fact that sat at the center of all of them, which was that the Duke of Merivale did not dance. He had not danced in 10 years. He came to the rooms and stood at the edge and watched with a face like a shut-house, and the men said he was proud, and the women said he was cold, and both of them said, when they had said all the rest, that there was something back in his history that had stopped him, though not one of them could tell you what it was. He was walking now, straight down the length of the long, bright floor, through the very middle of it, so that the couples gathering for the last dance drew back to either side to let him by, and then turned to watch him pass, the whisper going with him like a wind through standing corn. He was walking, and Ceres Alderton, still half a world away out past the Cape of Storms, took a moment longer than she should have, to understand that of all the directions a man might choose to walk in a crowded room, the Duke of Merivale had chosen the one that led to the cold square of floor beside the lesser door, where no one ever went, and no one was but her. He was walking toward her. He was walking toward her, and for as long as she was able, Ceres did not believe it. A man crossing a ballroom is walking toward a great many people at once. She kept her eyes on the middle distance and told herself he meant the card room beyond her shoulder, or a friend among the dowagers, or the lesser door itself and the cold hall past it. She glanced behind her once, quickly, to find the person he must really mean. There was only the pillar and the wall and a footman with a tray. When she looked back, he was there. Close. Nearer than anyone had stood to her in 2 years, without a card table safely between them. The room had gone quiet in rings, the way water stills in rings, spreading from the place where he stopped, until even the musicians faltered and held. 100 faces turned. Saris felt the whole weight of the assembly swing toward the cold square of floor by the lesser door and settle on her, and she stood in it with her empty card at her wrist and could not have found a single word. The Duke of Marival bowed to her. It was not a small bow. It was the bow a man makes when he means the whole room to see him make it. "Will you dance, Miss Alderton?" He knew her name. That was the first blow, before ever the question landed. He said it plainly, the name that emptied rooms, the name she had learned to give last, and lo. And he said it as though it were an ordinary name belonging to an ordinary woman, and he did not so much as glance aside to see whose faces changed at the sound of it. She thought, wildly, that it must be some new cruelty she had not met before. She looked for the mockery in his face, and did not find it. His face gave back nothing at all, only a grave and settled attention, and a pair of dark eyes that rested on her with a steadiness that was somehow harder to bear than any sneer could have been. "Your Grace," she said, and heard her own voice come out level, which was a small miracle. "You cannot wish to." "I find that I do," he said, and he held out his hand. There is a kind of moment a person cannot reason her way through, but must step into or refuse forever. Saris Alderton, with an empty card and a ruined name, and nowhere in the wide, cold world that wanted her, looked at the offered hand of the one man in England more talked of than herself, and put her own into it. The floor cleared for them the way a road clears for something heavy. The other couples, formed and ready for the last dance before supper, drew back to the walls, not out of courtesy but out of the plain human wish to see. The musicians found their place again, and the Duke of Marival, who had not danced in 10 years, danced. He danced gravely and exactly, like a man taught very well, who had not permitted himself the thing since, with a carefulness in every figure a careless partner would never have shown. He said almost nothing. His hand was warm and certain at her waist and in her palm, and he turned her down the long room under the eyes of every soul who had spent 2 years pretending she was a draft from an unshut door. Somewhere in the second figure, Saris found a scrap of her courage and spent it. "Why?" she said, low, so that only he could hear. "Of every woman in this room, why me?" He was silent long enough that she thought he did not mean to answer at all. Then he said, without looking down at her, in a voice low and a little rough, as though it were a thing he did not often take out and use, "I have watched a great many rooms like this one, decide who is worth the trouble of their warmth. They are wrong far oftener than they are right. Tonight, they were wrong." That was all. He did not explain it. He turned her again, and the dance carried them on, and Caris did not trust herself to ask him anything more. When it ended, he bowed again, as deep as before. "Thank you, Miss Alderton," he said, and he left her, standing in the middle of the floor, with every eye in Bath upon her, and walked back to the cold edge of the room where he lived, and took up his place against the wall as though nothing at all had passed. The whispering broke over her like a wave the instant his back was turned. She stood in it, keeping her chin in its careful order, and made herself walk, not too fast, toward the lesser door and the cold hall beyond, where she might be alone and shaking in the dark. She did not see, because she was looking at the floor, the one face in all that bright, buzzing room that had not moved at all. A woman no longer young, gowned in dove gray, stood quite still by the far pillar. Her face was still a handsome one, and she wore a smile upon it the way a soldier wears a coat, for good order and not for warmth. And she watched the Alderton girl go by on the memory of a duke's arm, with an attention that had nothing kind in it anywhere, and she did not leave off watching until the girl was gone from the room. Mrs. Vellicott was not grateful. Saris had known she would not be, and still the size of it caught her off her guard. She had half imagined a duke's notice might raise her a little in her employer's eyes, might buy a week's peace. But what Mrs. Vellicott purchased in a companion was safety. The safety of standing beside a dull, correct, invisible person. And there was nothing whatever safe about a companion the whole of Bath now said a duke had crossed a ballroom to hold. "Do you know what they are saying?" Mrs. Vellicott's voice shook. They were in the cold parlor of her lodging in the morning, and she had not asked Caris to sit. "Do you know what a man of that kind means by such a thing? A man who has not so much as bowed to a decent woman in 10 years, and he picks out my companion in front of the whole assembly, a girl already. She could not finish it. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "I took you in good faith. I will not have my name spoken in one breath with his. You will pack your things, and you will do it this morning." So that was the last door but one, shut like all the rest, only quicker. Saris packed her things, which did not take long, and as she folded the turned and remade gown down into her small case, she found that she was almost calm, with the flat calm that came to her at the very floor of things, and she made herself think clearly about the Duke of Marival, because whatever came of her next, he was somehow the root of it. She had spent the sleepless night learning what everyone else in Bath already knew. The talk came in through the thin walls of a lodging house, off the maids on the stair and the landlady below, and the whole of it was about him. Why the Duke of Marival did not dance. There were as many reasons as there were mouths to give them. Some said an old hurt had left him lamed in a way a coat could hide, but a dance never would. Some said he had loved a woman who died in the middle of a season, and had stood up last with her and sworn to stand up with no one after. Some said it was blacker still, a quarrel and a challenge, and a man left cold on a wet morning, and the Duke in penance ever since. Some, the ones who liked him least, said there was no mystery in it at all, only pride, that he held the whole turning world beneath the trouble of his own 2 feet. They agreed on nothing at all except the one hard fact beneath it. He did not dance. He had not danced in 10 years, and a man who keeps a rule 10 years and then breaks it in a public room for a ruined stranger is a man who is after something. And in her 2 years of hard schooling, Saris had never once known the wanting to turn out kind. She had her case shut and her bonnet tied when the knock came at the door below, and Mrs. Vellicott's voice went up a register, and a maid came to say there was a person asking after Miss Alderton, and a note. The note wasn't written in a spare upright hand, and it was not signed with a single bare letter, and there was no carriage waiting in the street, with a blank crest and a plain livery. The note was in the large, looping hand of a very old woman, and it was signed, in full and without the least shame, Drusilla Fanshawe. It offered Miss Alderton the place of companion to the writer, who was aunt to the Duke of Marival, and lived at Ashendene in the country, and who was, she wrote, old and blunt, and had already outworn the patience of 3 younger women in the post, and did not expect to be found easy. The wages were named. Miss Alderton might come or stay away as she pleased, but if she came, the note said, she was to bring nothing but herself, and whatever few things she was fond of, for the house held all the rest that a person could reasonably want. Saris read it through twice. Then she stood a while in the cold parlor with the paper in her hand and understood two things at once: that the old woman's hand was honest and wholly her own, and that the old woman's hand wasn't the hand behind it. Somewhere back of this plain, kind, unsurprising note, there stood a tall man against a wall who did not explain himself, and who had already crossed one crowded room for her, for reasons that not one soul in England could name to her. Every scrap of sense told her what an offer of that kind, out of that quarter, must cost in the end. She let herself feel the whole cold weight of the dread. And then she thought of the street, and the loud gray manufacturing towns away north, where a ruined woman might sink out of sight, and the very few coins left at the bottom of her purse, and understood that good sense was a thing a person had to be able to afford, and that she had run clean out of the money for it. She went out to the servant on the stair and said that she would come. We will pause here for just a moment. If you would like to be here when the rest of this story comes out, take a moment to subscribe and stay with me. Now let us go on. She had braced herself on the long, cold road down into Somerset for a grim house. It stood to reason. A man who had shut dancing and company and the ordinary warmth of people out of his life for 10 years would surely live in a place to match. Something high and hard and shuttered, all cold stone stairs and sheeted furniture, and the particular silence of rooms nobody enters. She had built the house up in her mind, across 2 days of jolting, and by the time the chaise turned in at the gates, in the last of the light, she had it finished and forbidding down to the last barred door. Ashendene was none of it. What rose out of the dusk was a long, easy sprawl of honey-colored stone beneath mossed roofs, settled onto its green shoulder of hill the way a cat settles onto a warm hearth, in no hurry and quite certain of its welcome. Its windows came alight one after another as the servants went round with the lamps, until the whole low front of it glowed like a lantern set down in the cold, and the wood smoke hung sweet on the still air. It was, Saris thought, climbing down stiff and afraid, the sort of house that has been loved without a break for a very long time. It was the last sort she had come prepared for, and it unsteadied her more than any grim pile of stone could have done. She had armed herself against a hard house and brought no armor at all against a kind one. She was met by the housekeeper, a round, soft woman named Mrs. Pengelly, with flour still on her apron and a face made for smiling, who took Saris's small case out of her cold hands as gently as though it held something that might break, though it held only all that Saris owned in the world, none of which could break, having done its breaking a long while since. She was shown up to the best room she had slept in for 2 years, warm to the very door, with a good fire that had plainly been burning some hours, the bed turned down, the curtains drawn, and on the washstand, a jug of water still faintly warm to the hand. Saris stood in the middle of it and could not make it fit anything she knew of the world. "Was I looked for to exactly as this?" she asked. Mrs. Pengelly paused at the door in a way Saris would come to know, a small private hesitation, as though weighing out how much she was free to say. His Grace gave orders. "You were to have the south room, miss," she said at last. "It takes the morning sun. He came up to look it over himself before ever you were on the road, which in all my years under this roof, I have not once known him do for any guest that came. For what reason, I could not begin to guess. He is not a man to give you his reasons. But he saw to it himself, with his own eyes, and that is not a small thing, whatever it may mean." She set a fold of the curtain straighter than it had been. "You rest now, miss. Ring if you want a thing, though you will have to want it loudly, for it is a great empty house, and I am at the far end of it more often than not." She went out, and Sarah stood before the good fire and found her eyes stinging in a way they had not stung for a very long time. A great house lit 100 fires in a night, she told herself, and thought no more of any of them. But a duke had come up himself to see a room made ready for a stranger. He would not say why he wanted warm, and she could not decide what to do with such a thing, and so did nothing with it, and went down when she was called. She met Lady Drusilla Fanshawe that evening, and Lady Drusilla, at the least, made a plain kind of sense from the first minute. The Duke's aunt was a very small, very old woman, upright as a fire iron, with a quick-lined face and restless pale eyes that went over Ceres once, top to toe, and seemed to take an inventory and set it away for later. She began to talk almost before Ceres was through the door, and did not greatly leave off. She talked of the road and the cold, and the uselessness of companions, and the badness of her own temper, and the shortcomings of the vicar, in a long, dry, easy stream that asked nothing of Charis, but that she sit by the fire and be carried along on it. It was the better part of an hour before Ceres understood that the talking was a mercy. The old woman had seen her fright the moment she came in at the door, and had set herself at once to cover it, to fill the strange, frightening room with sound, and ask nothing whatever of the frightened girl in it, until the shaking should have gone out of her. Only once did she come near the thing that mattered. "You are wondering why you are here," said Lady Drusilla, not looking up from her cards. "Of course you are. Any woman with a grain of sense would be. I will give you my own part of it, which is soon told. I am old, and I am poor company, and I have gone through companions the way other women go through gloves, and the last of them gave her notice inside the month. My nephew has wearied of hunting me fresh ones. He gave me your name. That is as much as I am able to tell you, every word of it true, and it is not the half of what you would like to know. The rest of it belongs to him. You will have about as much luck prizing it out of him as out of the wall at your back, and I would not spend yourself on the trying." "You know what my name is," Ceres said. She had not meant to say it. The old pale eyes came up and held her a long moment. "I do," said Lady Drusilla. "I knew it before ever the note was written, and I sent the note regardless of it. You may take what comfort you can out of that, for it is the only comfort on the subject you are likely to get from me." And she turned the talk to other matters, and Ceres understood that she had come, gently, up against the far edge of what this old woman would tell her, and that all the rest lay somewhere in the keeping of a man who would not explain himself. She lay awake late that first night in the warm south room. 2 hard years had taught her exactly what warmth cost, which was always something. So she lay in the good bed and listened to the strange house tick and settle, and waited, quite calmly, to learn what she was being kept warm and fed and gentled for, because there would be a reckoning. There was always a reckoning, and in her experience, the softer the bed, the harder, in the end, it tended to come. And it was then, somewhere past the middle of the night, in a house she had been told, plainly held, hardly a living soul, and no ceremony, and nothing at all to disturb her rest, that she heard the music. It came up faint through the floor from somewhere far below her, a few notes, and then a phrase, and then a whole slow, aching line of it, an instrument played low in the dark by someone who did not mean on any account to be heard. It was the last sound she had looked for in that silent, gabled house. She lay rigid and listened. It was not a servant idling at the keys. It was too careful for that, too sorrowful, too much like a man saying aloud, in the one way left open to him, a thing he could say in no other. It went on a while beneath her feet in the dark, and then, all at once, as though whoever played had caught the sound of his own grief and could not stand it, the music broke off in the very middle of a phrase, and didn't come again. Saris lay a long time after in the dark, listening to a silence that had a shape in it now, and wondering who it was in that warm, strange house who crept down when the world was asleep to play, unheard, the saddest music she had ever heard in her life, and then could not so much as bear to finish it. She had told herself she would not go looking for it. She went looking in the morning. The gray hour before the house woke had always been hers, even in the worst of the 2 years. And at Ashendene she took it back the first morning after the music. She went down the cold stairs in her shawl, while the windows were still the color of ash, following the memory of the sound through a house plainer and older by that light, until she came to a door at the end of a passage that stood a little ajar, and pushed it, and went in. It was a long room with a bank of tall windows down one side, full of shrouded shapes. Every piece of furniture wore a dust sheet, so that the whole room seemed to sleep under snow, except for one thing. In the far corner, uncovered, its sheet folded back and laid aside with care, stood a pianoforte. On the little shelf above the keys, a candle had burned itself down to a hard puddle of wax in the night. A single sheet of music stood open on the stand. Someone had been here, and not long since, and had left the one instrument bare in a room full of covered ones, as a man leaves out the one book he means to come back to. Saris crossed the sleeping room and stood over the keys, and did not touch them for a while. She had learned music as a girl before, and had not touched an instrument in 2 years, since it had gone with everything else to men her father never owed. She looked at the bare keys in the gray light, and felt the old wish come up sharp as hunger, and told herself not to, and then sat down and laid her hands on them, very softly, and played the first slow line of the piece open on the stand. "You read it faster than I do," said a voice from the door. She came off the bench as though it had burned her. The Duke of Marival stood in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, a man caught at some private hour of his own, and for the length of a breath neither knew what to do, and then he came a few steps in and stopped, keeping his distance. As a man keeps it from a bird, he does not wish to startle off the sill. "I beg your pardon," she said. "I heard in the night. I should not have come." "You should come whenever you like," he said. "The room is no use to anyone else." He looked at the covered shapes and the one bare instrument, and something moved in his still face she could not read. "It has not been played in 10 years, he said, "until this last little while." "Who plays it now?" she asked, though she thought she knew. He did not answer that. He came to the pianoforte and looked down at the open music as though it had cost him something to set out. "Badly. Out of practice," he said in his low, rough voice. "As a man walks, who has been a long time abed. It is easier at night. There is no one to hear how bad it has grown." "I heard," she said. "It wasn't bad." He looked at her then, straight, with the dark eyes that gave nothing away, and took everything in. And she braced, without knowing she braced, waiting for the turn, for the price of having been let into a private room at a private hour to make itself known. It did not come. He only inclined his head, once, gravely, as a man acknowledges a thing said honestly, and said, "You will play better than I ever shall. Use it as you please. No one will trouble you here at this hour but me, and I will keep to my own end." Then he took up his coat and went out, and left her alone in the long room with the sleeping furniture and the one bare instrument, and Caris sat back down on the bench in the growing light, and put her hands to the keys again, and found her eyes stinging for the second time in that house, and could not have named the reason if her life had hung upon it. She spent her first weeks at Ashendene, waiting for the price to be named. Everything 2 hard years had taught her said a bill was coming, that the warm room and the open music room and the punctual wages were only the front of it, to be presented in full once she had grown soft enough to mind the paying. She watched the Duke for the moment his silence would turn. Week upon week it did not come, and the not coming unsettled her more than any demand could have. For a demand she would have understood, and this she did not. What she came to understand instead, slowly, was where the man's silence went. It went into deeds. She saw the first of them by accident, on a raw morning in her 3rd week, when she had walked down to the home farm on an errand of the old lady's, and found a knot of men in the yard and a boy in the middle of it. Not a boy of the house. A poacher, taken in the night with a hair in his coat and the keeper's hand hard on his collar. A thin young man with a thin, frightened face and the particular stillness of someone who knows exactly what the law will do to him and to the children who depend on him. Transportation at the least. A family left to the parish. Everyone in the yard knew it, and the keeper was working himself toward the pleasure of saying so when the Duke came round the corner of the barn. He did not raise his voice. He never, she would learn, raised his voice. He looked a long moment at the man, and the hair, and the man's very bad boots, asked the keeper 2 quiet questions, and said the man was to be taken on at the far end of the estate, under the keeper's own hand, to mind the game he had lately been stealing, his wages to begin that day. And if the family wanted for anything before the 1st quarter, the keeper was to see to it and bring the account to the house. Then he went, before the man on his knees in the mud could get a word of thanks out, as though thanks were a thing he could not stand to be near. After that, she knew what to look for, and once she knew, she saw it everywhere. She saw it in the small farmer 3 fields over, whose debts had been quietly bought up by a stranger and forgiven, so that the man went to his grave believing he had simply, once in his life, had a run of good luck. She saw it in the schooling of a clever girl from the village, paid for out of a fund that Saris, who kept the old lady's small accounts, could find no trace of anywhere in the account books, because the fund did not exist. And she saw it in old Tozer. Tozer was a blind fiddler who had played at every wedding and fair in that part of Somerset for 50 years, until his sight and then his takings failed him together, and he had been brought one hard winter to the point of pawning the fiddle itself, which was the last thing in the world he owned and the only thing he was. She met him on the lane one afternoon, sitting in the sun outside his cottage with the fiddle across his knees, and she stopped to speak to him, and he told her the whole of it, not knowing who she was or where she lodged, the way old people tell a wonder to a stranger. "They tell me it were a music fund," he said, and turned his blind face up to the sun and laughed, not unkindly at the folly of it. "A fund, they says, for old players fallen on hard times. Redeemed my fiddle out of pawn and put a little by for my keep. Well," he ran his thumb along the strings, and they answered low and true. "I never heard tell of a fund that walked up my own lane on a wet night to see was I warm, and stood at my gate a while and said not a word, and were gone before I could get to the door. Funds don't do that. A man does that. There's a man hereabouts does more good than the whole bench of magistrates, and won't be caught at it, and has took some hurt that stops him owning to it. I put him in my prayers by no name at all, for I've none to give him. I reckon the one above knows the man I mean." Caris walked home with that in her, and it did not leave her. She had come to Ashendene believing herself the only soul in the county who owed the Duke a debt she could not name. She saw now that she was one of a great many, scattered through the fields and cottages and lanes, a whole quiet company carried through their worst hour by a hand none could thank, who said a nameless man in their prayers and never knew the name was cut in stone over his own gate. It was a strange thing to be one of a company you had thought yourself alone in, and a warm thing on a cold walk home. and it frightened her more than the cold had ever done, for it meant she was coming, against every hard lesson of 2 years, to want something again, and she knew what came of wanting. They came to know each other in the gray hour, in the room full of sleeping furniture, and almost none of the coming to know was spoken aloud. She had meant to keep out of his way there, but the room was hers whenever she wished it. He had said so, and she found that he did not mind her being in it. And then she found, without quite letting herself notice the finding, that he sought it. He would come in at his own end at the gray hour to find her already at the keys, and instead of going away again, he would settle in the shrouded chair by the window with a book he did not read, and let the music go on, and the two of them would be silent together in the growing light in a way that ought to have been unbearable and was not. She had never in her life been so comfortable in a silence. They began to talk after a fashion. She would play and stop and say some small thing about the piece, that the man who wrote it had plainly never grieved a day in his life, or he would not have set the slow part so prettily, and the Duke would consider it with his whole grave attention, and then say something dry and exact, and unexpectedly to the point. He spoke little, always as a man spends coin he has counted twice, but what he said was worth the counting. Once she teased him, greatly daring, that she had never heard him say a good word of any living soul, and did he think well of anyone at all? "Seldom," he said. "It spares the disappointment." Then, after a silence in which he seemed to weigh the rest, "I make a small number of exceptions. They are a great deal of trouble. I am given to understand they are worth it." He did not look at her while he said it. He looked at the gray window, and Saris looked down at the keys and did not answer, because she could not, and played instead the first line of the piece he had left open that first morning, which she had since learned was his, and heard him go very still behind her in the shrouded chair, and neither of them said a word about that either. There came a visitor to Ashendene that season, a Mrs. Prowse, a county lady who called on Lady Drusilla twice a year, stayed too long, and knew a little about everyone. She looked at Saris with frank curiosity over the teacups, and worked her way round to the thing she had come to say. "Of course," she said, dropping her voice pleasantly, "they do say the Duke is not quite." And she touched her own temple and smiled. "One hears such things. It is the silence, you know. It is not natural in a man. My own husband says a man who will not take his place among people has something in him he dares not let out." Karis set down her cup. She had not meant to speak. She heard herself speak. "Your husband is mistaken," she said. "I have lived beneath this roof these 10 weeks, and in that time I have watched a poacher kept from the hulks, a blind man's fiddle bought back from the pawnbroker, and a clever child schooled by a fund that does not exist, all of it by a hand that took the greatest care never to be seen or thanked. That is not a man with a thing he dares not let out. That is a man who decided long ago that saying is cheap and doing is dear, and chose the dear one, and has paid it in silence every day since. I only wish there were more of his kind, and fewer of the kind that tapped their heads over the tea." There was a silence. Mrs. Prowse's smile set like a jelly. Across the room, Lady Drusilla made a small sound into her cards that might have been a cough and was not. And Saris, her heart going hard, understood 2 things at once: that she had just been unforgivably rude to a guest in the old lady's drawing room, and that she had meant every word of it and would say it again tomorrow. She had stood up for the silent man exactly as, though she did not yet know it, a silent man had once stood up for her father in a room that did not wish to hear it. She did not know that he heard of it. He heard of everything at Ashendene. That evening, when she came down to the music room at the gray hour, there was a fresh sheet of music on the stand that had not been there in the morning. It was a copy, in the spare upright hand, she now knew, as well as her own, of the slow piece that was his, the one he could not bear to finish in the dark. Across the top, he had written 4 words. For you to finish. There was no signature, and there did not need to be one, she thought, holding it, of the locked leather traveling case on his study table that he kept always by him and never once opened while another soul was in the room, and wondered, in a distant way she did not yet let herself follow, what such a man kept so close and would not speak of. Then she sat down and finished his piece for him all the way to the end, in the empty room, not knowing whether he was anywhere in the house to hear it, and played it as though he were. It was Lady Drusilla who told her, in the end, and she told her because she could not bear to watch the not knowing eat the girl any longer. It was a hard, bright afternoon in February, and the old woman was in one of her fierce moods. She put down her cards and said, without warning, "You still do not know why he sent for you. It is wearing you thin, I can see it, and I am going to break my word to my nephew and tell you the beginning of it. For I am past 80, and have earned the right to break a word or two before I go. I would rather you did a foolish thing knowing than blind. Sit down." Sarah sat down. "Do you know how your father was ruined?" said Lady Drusilla. "The whole of it, or only the part the papers printed?" "I know he did not do it," said Saris. "Yes, he did not do it. I know that too." The old mouth was grim. "There was a man, 10 years ago now, who did do it. A clever man, a great man of business, who let your father's good name carry the weight of his theft and went home to his dinner. He's dead now. He died respected and mourned, with a fine stone over him, and the thing he did to your father would have stayed under that stone until the last day, but for one person who saw the truth of it and could not prove it." She looked at Saris with her restless, pale eyes gone suddenly still. "My nephew saw the truth of it. He was 22. He was the most open-hearted boy God ever made, and he was certain, in the way only a boy of 22 can be certain, that a true thing has only to be said out loud in a room full of decent people, for the decent people to hear it. There was a great assembly that season, a ball, the kind of night where all the county that mattered was gathered under one roof. And in the middle of it, at the height of the talk against your father, my nephew stood up on the floor of that ballroom and said what he knew. He named the man who had done it. He said your father was an innocent man, and he said it with his whole heart, in front of every soul who might have saved him." Saris had gone very still. "They laughed at him," said Lady Drusilla, and her old voice was steady and terrible. "That is the thing you must take hold of if you are ever to take hold of him. They laughed. A green boy with no proof but his own certainty, standing up on a dance floor to accuse a great and powerful man in defense of a ruined clerk. They thought it the finest joke of the season. The powerful man's friends closed round him like water over a stone, painted my nephew a fool or a boy taken in, and then, being clever, turned his very speaking into a weapon. 'See,' they said, 'the accused has no friend but this wild boy who will say anything. So his speaking did not save your father. It helped to sink him the faster. He learned that night, on that floor, before all those laughing faces, exactly what his word was worth in a public room, which was nothing. Worse than nothing. A lesson of that kind, at that age, will cure a young man of ever standing up on a floor again.' He never danced after," Saris said, her lips cold. "He never danced again." "He never danced again," said the old woman, "nor made a speech, nor took a public part in anything, nor let one word of his be spent where the world could laugh at it. He put the whole of himself into the one kind of doing the world cannot laugh at, the the kind done in silence that asks no one to believe anything. And he waited. 10 years he gathered, quietly, the proof he had lacked at 22, and watched all the while to see what the world would make of the daughter. And when he learned she had come to Bath and was standing at the cold edge of a ballroom while every dance was claimed but hers, he did the one thing he had sworn never to do again. He crossed a floor. She took up her cards again, and her old hands were not quite steady. There, now. Now you know why the fire was lit before you asked for it. It was not for a companion. It was for a debt. I have broken my word, and I do not repent it. And you will not tell him I told you. And you will do now whatever the knowing tells you to do. Sarah sat a long time in the bright cold room and did not move. She understood now a great many things. The look she had seen in his face that first morning over the quays, so strangely like a debt. The fire and the music room and the terrible care taken that no mercy should ever be traced to him. The whole shape of the silence and the man. And she understood, with a pang that took her breath, what it meant for her. Every kindness of that whole strange winter had been done, not for her, but for a debt to a dead man, out of a guilt 10 years old. He had never once imagined that she might come to matter to him for her own sake, and she had come to want him to. That was the foolish thing Lady Drusilla had seen coming. She had fallen, somewhere in that season of gray hours and unfinished music, wholly in love with a man who believed himself only to be settling an old account with her father's ghost. The trouble came, as it always comes, from the one person who had the most to lose by the truth. The man who had ruined her father was long dead, but he had left a widow very much alive, the woman in dove-gray silk who had stood by the pillar at the Bath Assembly and watched Caris walk past on the memory of a duke's arm, and had not smiled with her eyes. Her name was Lady Sabine Rassenden. She had built her whole life, since her husband died, upon the reputation he left behind, the fortune of his charities, the respectability of his name, and she guarded all three the way a lioness guards her cubs, for they were the whole of what she had. Whether she knew the precise thing her husband had done to Bartram Alderton, or had made herself carefully not know it, in the way people unknow the crimes that keep them comfortable, came to the same thing. She knew that the Alderton name was a danger, and she knew that the Alderton name under the wing of the Duke of Merivale, the one man in England who had ever stood up and spoken it aloud in the same breath as her husband's, was a danger of another order entirely. She moved to end it as such people move, gracefully, pleasantly, leaving no mark that could be traced to her hand. She began with the oldest weapon there is. She began with a young woman's good name. It was easy. That was the cruelty of it. An unmarried woman living beneath the roof of an unmarried duke needed only to be mentioned in the right voice, with the right small sigh, for the mention to do all the rest of the work itself. It did not matter that Lady Drusilla lived at Ashendene, that every propriety was kept, that Saris was the old woman's paid companion and nothing more. Lady Sabine mentioned it, kindly, with a show of great reluctance, in a dozen drawing rooms, that it was such a pity the Alderton girl, whatever one thought of the father, should throw away the last rag of her good name to live so irregularly with a man like Merivale, about whom one heard such things. And she let the little sigh carry the rest. Within a month, it was everywhere, and it had done exactly what it was built to do. It had turned a duke's charity to a ruined man's daughter into an open scandal, and the scandal clung to Saris precisely as the first disgrace had clung, and it threatened now to pull down with her not only herself, but the old woman she served, and the man who had taken her in. She learned of it the way one learns of such things, a coldness here, an unanswered note there, and then all at once, on a single cruel afternoon. She had gone with Lady Drusilla to a house where the old woman had been received for 40 years, and the door was opened, and the daughter of the house came out herself to the carriage, pink and wretched, to say that her mother was not at home. Lady Drusilla, past 80, who had not been refused a door in the whole of her long life, sat very straight in the carriage and said nothing at all until they were away down the drive. Then she said, in a voice shaking with a rage Saris had never heard from her, "So it has come to this. They will shut their doors on me, at my age, over a lie, sooner than shut them on Sabine Rassenden." But under the rage, Saris heard the hurt, and she knew, with a sick certainty, that she was the cause of it, and that the only decent thing left to do was the thing she had put off doing for a month. To go, she went to him that night. She had never once, in the whole season, gone to him to speak of anything that mattered. She went now. He was in his study, the door open, the candles lit, the locked leather case at his elbow where it always sat, and he looked up as she came in, and something crossed his still face, quickly mastered. She made herself say it plainly, all of it, because he was a man who valued only the things that were real, and a plain truth, plainly said, was the realest thing she had to give him. "You must let me go," she said. "You know what is being said, and who is saying it. Lady Drusilla was refused a door today, at 80, after 40 years, because of me. That woman means to ruin all three of us, and she will, because a lie in the right mouth cannot be answered. I will not stay and be the ruin of the two people who—" Her voice caught. She steadied it. "I know why you brought me here. I know about my father, and what you did for him once, and what it cost you. This was never a post. It was a debt, and you have paid it 10 times over. I release you from the rest. You owe my father nothing further, and me nothing at all. Let me go, and let the talk go with me, and keep your aunt her doors and yourself your peace. It is the last thing I can do for any of you, and I am asking you to let me do it." There was a long silence. It was not like the other silences. She watched him reach out of 10 years of habit for a pen to write his answer rather than speak it, and she watched him look at the pen and set it down. He stood. He came round the desk, and he stopped close in front of her, so that she had to lift her face to his, and she saw in the dark eyes the whole of the old wound Lady Drusilla had named, and something else now, something that had not been there that first morning over the quays, something that had grown all season in the gray hour and had nothing at all to do with any debt to any dead man. "No," he said. His voice was low and rough, and it cost him something visible to say even the one word. "You will not go. I let you believe this was a debt, because a debt was a thing I knew how to pay in silence, and I have paid everything in silence for 10 years. It was a debt once. It has not been a debt since some gray morning in that music room when you told me the man who wrote my own piece had never grieved a day in his life, and were right, and did not soften it because I was a duke. I let you go on thinking it because I had stopped believing anything I said aloud could be worth the saying, or safe to say, or anything but a fresh way to be laughed at. That was cowardice. I am done with it." He drew a breath. "Sabine Rassenden will not ruin you. I will not permit it, and I will not permit it in the one way I have refused to try for 10 years. I have learned this season, from you, that there is a worse thing than standing up and speaking the truth and having it do harm. It is holding the truth that would do good, out of fear, and calling the fear wisdom. I called it wisdom for 10 years. It was fear. You have cured me of it." The very ghost of something moved at the hard corner of his mouth. "Now go to bed and trust me, and don't speak to me again of leaving. You will find, I think, that it is not so easy when it is your own turn to be brave. I have letters to write, and for the first time in 10 years, I know exactly what I mean to say." She could not speak at all, she who had done all the speaking that season. She stood in the door of his study and could not find one word. "Corwin," she said at last. It was his own name, which she had never once used, which no one used. She had not known she knew it until it was out. He looked at her, and for a moment, the still face wasn't still at all. "Say it again in a week," he said, very low, "when you are free, and it can mean the thing you mean by it, and not gratitude, nor need, nor the want of anywhere else to go. Say it to me then. I have waited 10 years. I can wait the week." The great assembly of the county was held that year, as it was held every year, in the long rooms of the assembly house in the county town, and everyone came to it, everyone who was anyone for 30 miles, and that year they came burning with the story of the Alderton girl and the silent Duke. Lady Sabine Rassenden came to it certain, at the height of her power, that she had already won, and she had every reason to be. The girl was disgraced twice over, the old aunt shut out of doors that had stood open 40 years, and the Duke of Marival could no more stand up and defend them before the county than raise the dead, for the whole world knew he did not speak in public rooms, did not take a floor, did not put himself where the county could turn and look at him. He would sit at the cold edge and hold his tongue and let the tide carry the girl out. Her entire plan was built upon the silence of the Duke of Marival, which was the surest thing in the west of England. She swept into the long rooms in her finest dove gray, was received like a queen, and permitted herself the smallest gracious sighing mention of poor Lady Drusilla, who really should have known better at her age, and of the Alderton girl, of whom the less said the kinder. Sarris had not wished to come. He had asked her to, not written it, asked it, in the rough, relearned voice that she found she could refuse nothing. And so she came, on Lady Drusilla's arm, into the bright, long rooms full of the very people who had shut every door against her. She held her back straight and waited to be cut, and she was cut, thoroughly, by 100 people at once, the shoulders turning, the little space opening around her, and the old woman, as around something catching. She bore it. She had borne it before. Beside her, Lady Drusilla bore it too, fierce and upright and 80, and the two of them stood in their small island of cold in the middle of all that warmth and glitter. And across the room, Lady Sabine Rassenden smiled her pleasant smile. And then the Duke of Marival crossed the room. They did not, at first, understand what they were seeing. They saw the silent Duke, whom half of them had forgotten was present, rise from the cold edge and begin to walk. They made way as they always made way, and supposed he was leaving, or going to some word with his aunt. He came instead to where Sarris stood in her island of cold, and took his place beside her, deliberately in full view of the whole county, so that the cold space now held a duke, and the making of it suddenly cost the room something. Then he turned and faced them all, and did the thing no soul in that county had seen him do in 10 years. He spoke aloud, to all of them, and his voice, rough at the first word, and steadying as it went, carried down the long room until the music in the gallery faltered, and the talk fell away like a dropped cloth. "You will forgive the clumsiness of it," he said. "I am out of the practice of speaking to a room, as you all know. You have made a great deal, these 10 years, of my silence. You have called it pride and madness and worse. I will tell you tonight what it was, and then I will tell you a thing I should have been able to make you hear a long time ago." He let the stir go through the room and pass. 10 years ago, in a room very like this one, on a floor like this one, a man was destroyed for a crime he never committed. His name was Alderton. He kept the accounts and the trust of half the good families in this county for 30 years, without the loss of a farthing, until a great sum was made to vanish and made to look as though his hand had taken it. He did not take it. I knew that he had not. I knew whose hand had. I was 22, and I stood up on a floor like this one and said what I knew, and you laughed at me. Some of you laughing here tonight laughed at me then. You called me a green fool, and were clever enough to turn my speaking into one more stone to throw at him, so that I did not save that man. I helped to bury him. I learned the lesson you taught me, that the truth is worth nothing in a room like this unless it comes with weight behind it. So I said no more. For 10 years I gathered the weight. I did in silence what I had failed to do with words. And I have it now. He drew from inside his coat the plain leather case that had sat locked at his elbow all season, and from it a packet of papers, and he held it up, and the room was utterly still. The man who took the money from the Ockley Trust and let an innocent man's name carry it was Sir Edmund Rassenden. He did not raise his voice on the name. He did not have to. I have the proof of it here, the true accounts, the banker's record he believed destroyed, a letter in his own hand to the clerk he paid to copy Alderton's. I have held these 3 years and more, and did not use them, because the man was dead, and I am not in the business of digging up the dead, and because I judged that to tear it open again would do the living daughter more harm than good. I was wrong. There is a worse thing than a truth that does harm in the telling. It is a truth kept back out of fear and called prudence. Bartram Alderton was an innocent man. His daughter is an innocent woman. And the next person under this roof who offers her an unkindness will answer for it to me. I find, after 10 years, that I have my voice back and a very great deal saved up to say. There is a kind of quiet that is heavier than any noise, and it came down now over the long, bright rooms. In the middle of it, alone, Lady Sabine Rassenden stood with her pleasant smile gone at last from her face. Every eye in the room turned slowly toward her. She had built her whole life on a dead man's name and a buried thing, and the buried thing was unburied now, in a duke's hand, before all the people who mattered. She looked, in that moment, not like a lioness at all, but like exactly what she was, a frightened woman who had spent a great many years guarding a grave, and had just watched it open to the light. She said nothing. There was nothing left to say. She gathered up what was still hers to gather, which was not much, and she went out through the parting crowd alone. And the Duke of Merivale turned to Ceres Alderton in the ringing silence, in front of the whole staring county, and held out his hand, exactly as he had held it out to her once across a colder room. "Miss Alderton," he said, "there is a dance beginning. I have not danced in 10 years, but the once, and that once was with you, and I find I have grown particular. Will you stand up with me?" And Ceres, who had been left standing alone at the edge of every floor in the county for 2 long years, put her hand into his, and the crowd fell back to the walls, and the musicians found their place, and the man who never danced took the floor before all of them. With the one woman none of them had thought worth the claiming. They cleared her father's name that spring in the proper forms, with the proper papers, in a quiet room and not a loud one, for the loud part was already done. It took lawyers and time and the whole weight of a duke set behind it. And at the end of it, there was a document that said, in the dry language of such documents, that Bartram Alderton of Somerset had been wrongly accused and stood acquitted of any wrong, and that his good name was restored to him and to his heirs. Ceres held it in her hands in the music room at Ashendene, at the gray hour, with the Duke beside her. She read the dry words that gave her back the thing that had been taken from her father, and from her, and she wept. At last, the weeping she had trained herself out of in the hard years alone. He did not reach for a pen. He did not, this once, keep any silence. He put his arm about her and let her weep, and said nothing, because for once nothing needed saying, and it was the fullest silence of all that silent season. He never knew, she said, when she could speak. That is the thing I cannot bear. You have given him back his name, and he is not here to have it. He died believing he had failed, that his whole careful, honest life had come to nothing, that he had left his daughter a poisoned name and no one in the world. He knew one thing, said the Duke. It was the first she heard of it. I went to him before the end. I could not clear him then. I had no proof. But I was a young man of no weight in the world, and I went to him where he lay, and told him I knew he was innocent, and believed him, and would not rest while I lived until it was proven, however long it took. It was all I had to give him, my word, and I had learned by then how little my word was worth. But I gave it to him. He knew, Saris. At the very end, he knew that one person in the world believed him. It was not enough. It was not his name, nor his life. But he did not die, thinking no one believed him. I made certain of that much. He was quiet a moment. It was the last thing I said aloud to any living soul for 10 years, until you. I told a dying man that I believed him, and then I shut my mouth on the world, and I did not open it again until this winter, for you. And she understood then the whole shape of it, the 10 silent years set between 2 spoken truths, one to her dying father, and one to the room that had wronged him, and the long, dark silence between them broken at the last by a girl who had come to his cold county with nothing at all, and had given him back his voice without ever once knowing that was what she did. Her name was restored that spring, and a great deal more besides. The doors that had shut on her opened again, all of them, eagerly now, ashamedly now, and she found she did not care a straw for them, having learned exactly what they were worth. Lady Drusilla had her own doors back, and used them chiefly to be magnificently rude to everyone who had refused her, which she enjoyed more than anything had made her enjoy in years. And the Duke of Marival, who had taken in a ruined girl to pay a debt to a dead man, found himself at the end of that winter, with the debt paid and the wound healed, and his voice come back to him, and with a thing he had never once, in all his careful, silent planning, planned for. He asked her in the music room at the gray hour, where it had all begun. He did not write it. He had done with writing things for her. I have given you back everything that was taken from you, he said. Your name, your father's name, your place in the world, such as its places are worth. You are free now. You need nothing from me, and you have a name to be proud of, and every door in the county open to you. I made certain of that first, because I would not have you take me out of gratitude, or need, or the want of anywhere else to stand. You have the whole world back, so I may ask you cleanly, which I could not have done in the winter. He paused, and she saw the cost of it. The man who had spent his word so dear for 10 years, spending the dearest of them all. I was alone in my own silence for 10 years, and did not know it was loneliness until you came and filled it. Stay. Not as my aunt's companion, not as a debt I am paying, not because you must. Stay because you would. Marry me, Saris, and stand up with me, and we will spend what is left of the music. I am still out of practice at all of it, the speaking and the dancing both, and I mean to be practicing on you a very long time. And Saris Alderton, who had come to Ashendene with everything she owned in one small case, and no future at all, reached up and touched his hard face, the first time she had ever touched him of her own will, and said, "Yes, Corwin, I will. Though I warn you in return, I have grown fond of the gray-hour silences too, and I mean to keep some of them unfinished for the two of us." She was quiet a moment. "You gave me back my name," she said. "But you gave me a better thing first, before ever the name, and you gave it me that first night, with a fire lit in a cold room for a stranger you owed nothing, and a door left open at an hour no one was awake to see it. You gave me back the belief that a kindness could be only a kindness, and mean nothing but itself. I had lost that. It was the worst thing I lost, worse than the name. That is the man I am marrying. Not only the one who crossed the floor before all of them, though I love him too. The one who came up alone to see a cold room made warm and never meant me to know. They were married at Ashendene in the early summer, quietly, for neither cared for grandeur. Lady Drusilla sat in the front pew, looking as though she had arranged the whole business herself, which she maintained, to the considerable age she afterward reached, that she substantially had. The doors of the county that had shut on the bride stood all open now, and their owners came and were forgiven, more or less. Saris wore no borrowed finery, only a good plain gown, and carried her father's cleared name up the aisle like a thing come home. They kept, in the long, good years that followed, a habit that no one who did not know the story could ever make sense of. On the wall of the music room, framed among the instruments, hung a small, worn card. It was a ladies' dance card from a winter assembly at Bath, empty in every line but one, where a single dance stood written down and claimed. It was the card she had worn the night she was left standing alone after every dance in the room was taken, and one man who never danced had crossed the whole cold floor to claim the only one left. And in the second summer, he took her east, at last, to the far bright places her father had touched with one finger on a study wall and never seen, the ones she had gone to in her mind when the cold of a room grew too great to bear. Some Arcand and Trebizond, and the wide, warm, shining edge of the world, and she found that she did not need to go to them in her mind any more, because she was standing in them, on his arm, in the sun. Every fine house in the county had once turned Saris Alderton away, and had been right to, by the only measure such houses know. And one man who never spoke his own goodness aloud said nothing about any of it, and simply crossed a room and claimed the last dance no one else would. It was the whole of her happiness in the end, and it had begun in the moment she had stopped, at last, expecting anything good, and something good had crossed the floor toward her anyway,